Hello and welcome to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio. Researched and written in Indianapolis by Dr. Adrian Peterson and produced in the studios of WRMI Shortwave in Miami. I'm Jeff White. Today on Wavescan, a historic note, The Voice of America on the air in Australia, Part 1, American radio stations in Australia. We'll hear the world's oldest sound recording and our Japan DX report. Beginning in December 1941, American military forces began to flood into Australia, until ultimately 1 million personnel passed through Australia on their way for active duty up north. As Ray Robinson tells us, during this era, Australia's widespread continent became a broad staging ground in preparation for American involvement in General Douglas MacArthur's island-hopping campaigns in the South Pacific.
A large number of temporary American encampments were established near cities across the nation, and these served as training locations, active service facilities, hospitals for wounded and sick service personnel, or lodging locations for those enjoying R&R time, rest and refreshment, while on temporary leave. Back then, Radio Australia was on the air internationally under the British-style slogan, Australia Calling. There were so many Americans in Australia in early 1942 that Australia Calling introduced a new radio program in which American personnel could broadcast messages to loved ones back home. This program was transmitted from the new 10 kilowatt shortwave transmitter VLG, located at Lyndhurst, Victoria, and it was on the air on 9540 kHz under the specific call sign VLG2. Likewise, Australian and New Zealand Armed Forces personnel in the United States were granted a similar privilege in a calling home program that was on the air over the 100 kilowatt KWID located near San Francisco, California. In previous editions of Wavescan, we've presented the intriguing story of American radio stations in Australia, and the stations that have been presented thus far are American Armed Forces communication stations, in Melbourne WTJJ, Sydney WTJM, Brisbane WTO, Townsville WVJL, Melbourne Australian Air Force Station operated with American call sign WVJM, Darwin WVJK and WVLD, Adelaide River KAZ, and also the very substantial station WTO at Hemmant near Brisbane. In addition, American forces also operated 2 shortwave decoy transmitters in Australia that carried spurious dummy traffic in order to mislead Japanese radio monitors. These stations were located at Darwin in the Northern Territory and Perth in Western Australia. Although no details about these transmitters are known, it's presumed they were located at known American bases near Darwin and Perth, operated in international Morse code, and used low power, probably 10 kilowatts or less. In addition, American radio programming was on the air in Australia on just about every medium wave station throughout the country at some time or another, via all 29 ABC stations and all 99 commercial stations, a total of 128 radio broadcasting stations all told. Originally, this programming was presented for the benefit of locally billeted American personnel, but this relayed programming became so popular that it ended up being carried more for the benefit of Australians than for the visiting Americans. The government medium wave station 4QR in Brisbane, close to General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters, was made available to the AFRS, Armed Forces Radio Service, for the production, broadcast and nationwide distribution of locally produced programming for American personnel. At the time, 4QR was operated with just 500 watts on 940 kHz from the ABC transmitter site at Bald Hills, a little north of Brisbane. The AFRS 4QR link-up began in late 1943 and lasted for a few months into early 1944. To a lesser extent, Station 2FC in Sydney was made available to AFRS in the same way, for the production, broadcast and nationwide distribution of locally produced programming for American personnel. Back then, 2FC was operating from studios in Market Street, Sydney, and could be heard on 610 kHz with 10 kilowatts from the ABC transmitter site at Liverpool, south of Sydney. On the home service shortwave scene during the war years, there were 5 shortwave stations on the air in Australia, all owned and operated by the government's Postmaster General Department, PMG, with programming provided by the ABC. They each simulcast their parent medium wave stations, including American programming when scheduled. These shortwave transmitters were near Melbourne at Lyndhurst, Victoria, VLR with 2 kilowatts and VLG with 10 kilowatts. Near Sydney at Liverpool, New South Wales, there was VLI with 2 kilowatts. Near Brisbane at Bald Hills, Queensland, there was VLQ with 10 kilowatts. And near Perth at Wanneroo in Western Australia, VLW with 2 kilowatts.
The interval signal of Radio Australia there, Jacko, and the opening of a Radio Australia transmission. Now, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the ABC in Australia, is giving serious consideration to a hefty budget cut for Radio Australia, the international and overseas shortwave service of the ABC. The ABC itself is facing stringent financial problems, and recent information indicates that the annual budget for Radio Australia will be cut by 60%. The previous budget for Radio Australia amounted to 35 million Australian dollars, and the proposed new budget would total only 14 million Australian dollars. An organization known as the Friends of the ABC, with President Mal Hewitt, is lobbying for a reconsideration of the dramatically reduced budget for Radio Australia due to the importance of Radio Australia in the Asia-Pacific arena.
You're listening to Wavescan from Adventist World Radio. Send your comments and reception reports to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 in the United States. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 in the USA. Or you can email us at wavescan@awr.org. Our email once again, wavescan@awr.org.
Thank you, Alan Graham of HCJB. Up until quite recently, the oldest known recording of the human voice was listed as Thomas Edison in the year 1877. At the time, Edison was making experiments in the reproduction of sound in his laboratory at Menlo Park in New Jersey. The Edison apparatus consisted of a metal cylinder wrapped in tin foil and mounted so that it could revolve. A vibrating needle attached to a long horn made indentations in the tin foil, and when in playback mode, the recorded sound could be heard, though quite rough and distorted. However, after just a few playings, the etched recording in the tinfoil was damaged beyond usefulness. The first recording of the human voice on a cylindrical Edison phonograph was the children's poem Mary Had a Little Lamb, recited by Edison himself. That was back in the year 1847, when Thomas Alva Edison was just 30 years old. However, as a result of digital experimentation just a few years ago, the earliest known reproduction of the human voice now goes back 20 years earlier, to the year 1857. This is what happened, and we're grateful to radio historian Jerome Berg in suburban Boston for drawing our attention to this interesting information. Over in Paris, France in that year, 1857, printer and bookseller Edouard Léon Scott de Martinville experimented with the study of sound by utilizing a stylus attached to a vibrating diaphragm that made tracings on smoked paper and smoked glass. However, these tracings were intended for use as a study in the mechanics of sound rather than for the purpose of playback. This apparatus was known as the phonautograph, and the sooted tracings were known as phonautograms. The first phonautograph experiments with the tracing of sound on smoked paper and smoked glass involved tones and noises and the sound of a tuning fork, but not the human voice. However, 3 years later, on April 9, 1860, the sound of someone singing Clair de Lune in French without accompaniment was etched into the smoked soot on a sheet of paper, and it remained that way, unreproduced, for more than 1.5 centuries. Over in Paris, instrument maker Rudolf Koenig subsequently made phonautograph machines for sale, and several were procured by interested buyers in the United States. Over the years, others have experimented with the usage of a phonautograph, including Edison himself, as well as Alexander Graham Bell. Then quite recently, in December 2007, retired Maryland radio broadcaster David Giovannoni and a research assistant traveled to Paris in an endeavor to obtain top-quality copies of the original phonautograms made by Leon Scott. These were located at 2 different historic institutions in Paris, the Academy of Sciences and the Patent Office. Originals and copies of several of the early soot recordings were found, including a sheet of paper that contained the Clair de Lune tracings, dated April 9, 1860. This sooty tracing was made upon a sheet of paper measuring 9 inches by 25 inches that was made from recycled rag. Giovannoni obtained immaculate copies of many different early sooty tracings. The good quality copies of the original French phonautograms were sent to the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in Berkeley, California, where scientists Carl Haber and Earl Cornell utilized a previously developed digital procedure for turning ancient recordings into sound. The sooty tracings, turned into sound, revealed many different reproductions, including the 10-second-long 11-note tracing of Clair de Lune. It is thought that the voice singing Clair de Lune is the voice of Edouard Léon Scott himself. "17 years after the recording by Leon Scott of Clair de Lune in Paris, Thomas Edison in New Jersey recited Mary Had a Little Lamb into his tinfoil-covered metal cylinder in New Jersey. That was in 1877. 8 years later, 1885, Chichester Bell and Charles Tainter developed a wax-covered cardboard cylinder for recording and playing back sound in the Volta Laboratory in Washington, D.C., and this one was called the graphophone. Then 2 years later again, 1887, German migrant Emil Berliner invented the gramophone, a flat disc for use in the recording and playback of sound, particularly music. Originally, these gramophone records were 5-inch celluloid discs, and they were first made in Germany. When the technological procedure was transferred to the United States, the first American gramophone records were made from hard rubber, though soon afterwards a mixture of clay and shellac was used. Initially, there was no standard speed for the new gramophone records, and the earliest discs were spun at speeds anywhere from 60 to 130 revolutions per minute. Then in 1925, a standard speed of 78 RPM was adopted, though there is no known logical reason for this exact figure. In actual fact, the exact speed of the old 78 recordings varies from 77.92 to 78.26 RPMs, depending upon the electrical values of the equipment, its country of manufacture, and the standard measurements of electricity in the playback country. After the 78s came the 33 1/3 recordings, wire recorders, CDs, and you name it. While we're talking about the long and interesting history of the recording of sound, we should also mention the information about the earliest known recording of a wireless transmission. The original tinfoil-covered cylinder containing the off-air recording of a wireless transmission in Morse code is housed in the San Francisco State University. The Morse message was recorded at a speed of 125 revolutions per minute. The tinfoil wireless message seems to be the introductory comment just before a boxing match with information about the boxer Jack Johnson and his boxing opponent Jim Jeffries. This message was sent by wireless in the original Morse code that was developed by Samuel Morse and Alfred Vail in 1844. In this message, it is stated that Jack Johnson insisted on a fight with the retired Jim Jeffries, and boxing records do show that Johnson did meet Jeffries in a match of 15 rounds in Reno, Nevada on July 4th, 1910. This match was considered to be a fight of major significance in the boxing world, and progressive news of the event was flashed nationwide by Morse code just as quickly as the communications of the day would permit. A short article in the magazine Modern Electrics for August 1910 states that the details of the Johnson-Jeffries match were transmitted progressively by wireless station TG, which was owned by the Western Wireless Equipment Company in San Francisco. The station was located in the city offices of the company, and it was on the air with the news broadcast in Morse code for the benefit of ships at sea and for local amateur wireless operators along the west coast of the United States. A careful listening to the recorded message indicates that it was made by playing the sound from a wireless receiver directly into the recording horn of a cylinder phonograph. The available information would suggest that the Morse code wireless message from station TG in San Francisco was made shortly before 3 p.m. on Monday, July 4th, in the year 1910. It was apparently recorded by an amateur wireless operator somewhere in the San Francisco area. By courtesy of Glenn Sage in Portland, Oregon, and his website tinfoil.com, you can listen now to a portion of what is believed to be the oldest off-air recording from any wireless transmission. Morse code there. What is probably the oldest off-air recording from any wireless transmission. You're listening to Wavescan from Adventist World Radio. Let's go now to Yukiko Tsuji in Tokyo with her monthly DX report.
Hello and welcome to the DX Report of the Month from Japan Showtime Club, edited by Toshi Otake, and I'm Yukiko Tsuji. We have several DX reports from our club members this week. Radio Free Asia via Mongolia was heard on 7460 kHz on May 5th and 6th from 2100 to the sign-off at 2200 UTC in Korean. SIO rating was 353. Talk and music program were aired. Radio Taiwan International was heard on 15320 kHz on May 11th from 0300 to 0400 UTC in English. SIO rating was 343. News and talk programs such as People, Classic Shorts, The Hacker Connection, and On the Line were on the air. Voice of America via Philippines was received on 17820 kHz on May 8th from 0030 to 0100 UTC in English. SIO rating was 453. Learning English program was aired. NBC from Banimo, Papua New Guinea was heard on 3205 kHz on April 27th from 1117 to 1200 UTC in Pidgin. SIO rating was 352. Talk program was broadcast and some popular songs were played. ID was given at 1200. Voice of Martyrs via Tajikistan was heard on 7505 kHz on May 2nd from the sign-on at 1600 to 1631 UTC in Korean. SIO rating was 454. It signed on with Korean song, then ID was given. Talk and radio drama followed. According to Bulgarian DX blog, they started to use the new frequency 7530 kHz from May 6th. Deutsche Welle via Kigali, Rwanda was received on 11865 kHz on May 6th from 1900 to 2000 UTC in English. SIO rating was 353. News was broadcast, followed by Africa Link at 1905 and Pulse at 1930. Radio Tamazuji via Madagascar was heard on 15150 kHz on May 3rd, from the sign-on at 1500 to 1527 UTC in Sudanese and Arabic. SIO rating was 252. It signed on with chime and ID. Talk program in Sudanese followed. Arabic program started at 1514. Radio Nacional Arcángel San Gabriel, LRA 36, from Antarctica was received on 15475.98 kHz on May 2nd, from 1845 to 1941 UTC in Spanish. SIO rating was 241, then up to 242. Talk program by male and female announcers were on the air, and popular music was played. Also on May 6th, from 1841 to 2000 UTC, the same station was heard in Spanish, and the SIO rating was 241, then up to 242. They aired the same talk program, and accordion music was heard. Finally, Japan Shortwave Club will issue the QSL card for the correct report on our segment of Wavescan program. We are issuing QSL card by email to the report sent by email. Our address for your email report is jswcqsl@live.jp. I repeat, jswcqsl@live.jp. We continue to issue the printed QSL card by the same system as before. Your report should be addressed to JSWC PO Box 44, Kamakura, which is KAMAKURA, postal code 248-8691, Japan. $1 ILC or $2 for return postage will be appreciated. For this edition of DX Report, we would like to thank Mr. Iwao Nagatani, Mr. Koji Uenohara, Mr. Yasuharu Tanabe, Mr. Tetsuya Ogawa, Mr. Eiji Asaoka, and Mr. Chiaki Shimada for sharing the information with us. Thank you for listening, and please join us for our next edition of DX Report of Japan Shortwave Club. I'm Yukiko Tsuji in Tokyo.
Wavescan presents Focus on Asia, a year-long series of reports about shortwave broadcasting and listening on the continent of Asia. The HFCC's International Radio for Disaster Relief project is still on track for a major test of international shortwave broadcasters on June 5th and 6th. The HFCC states that the test will focus on CIRAF Zone 54, which is Indonesia. Now, we have a tentative schedule for these transmissions, which will take place during the Jakarta Media Summit. This is June 5th and 6th, UTC 0200 to 0230. Radio Australia from Shepparton will be on 21840 kHz with a special transmission for the International Radio for Disaster Relief project. At 0230 to 0530 UTC, the BBC Babcock Relay in Nakhon Sawan, Thailand, will be on 15650 kHz. 0500 to 0530, again on June 5th and 6th, Vatican Radio on 21840 kHz. 0530 to 0600 UTC, the SLBC, Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation from Trincomalee, on 15650 kHz. 0730 to 0800 UTC, M-Globe from Madagascar, the former Radio Netherlands relay station, will be on 21840 kHz with 250 kilowatts. And QSLs will be sent to anyone who sends a reception report to monitoring at mglob.mg. 0800 to 0830 UTC, the International Broadcasting Bureau of the U.S. from Thailand, or from the Philippines, or both. The alternative time for this is 0830 to 0900. We don't have a frequency on that, but the two main frequencies being used for these trials are 15650 and 21840 kilohertz. At 0830 to 0900 UTC, NHK and the World Radio Network from Palau on 15650 kilohertz. 0900 to 0930 is also the IBB, or alternative 0930 to 1000 IBB from the Philippines and or Thailand. 1000 to 1030 UTC, All India Radio from Bangalore with 500 kilowatts on 15 or 17 megahertz. 1030 to 1100 UTC, China Radio International in Chinese from Beijing on 21840 kilohertz. And 1100 to 1130 UTC, KTWR in Guam on 15650 kilohertz. There is also an unconfirmed as yet transmission from First Response Radio via the FEBC in the Philippines. This is the beginning of the program that will be broadcast on most of these transmissions.
This is a special program for the Media Summit on Climate Change, Information and Communication Technology and Disaster Risk Reduction in Jakarta. This broadcast is part of a trial of the International Radio for Disaster Relief Project to test shortwave frequencies that can be used for emergency broadcasting in disasters.
These swirling, vicious winds, these soaring temperatures.
This is terrible. This is war zone. Terrible.
When a disaster strikes, a cyclone, an earthquake, war, famine, we become hungry for information.
Part of a special transmission by the HFCC's International Radio for Disaster Relief Project, beamed to Indonesia June 5th and 6th, although I'm sure it will be heard in other target areas as well. Music from Lanzarote in the Canary Islands ends this edition of Wavescan. Thank you for listening to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio, researched and written in Indianapolis by Dr. Adrian Peterson. Next week, radio broadcasting from remote Howland Island. We'll have a report from the recent NASB, National Association of Shortwave Broadcasters, annual meeting in the United States, and our Philippine DX report. If you would like a QSL card for Wavescan, you can send your reports to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. Our email address for your comments and suggestions is wavescan@awr.org. I'm Jeff White at WRMI in Miami. Till next week, good listening, everyone.
Solo Dios mío.